Carl Storer of Fightful.com. I'm joined on the line by Matt Hodgson, the director of Am Duran, a documentary that touches upon the life and boxing career of Roberto Duran and how it's interwoven with the changes in the political situation in the native country of Panama. Am Duran will be available on iTunes, Amazon Video, Google Play, and other digital platforms starting Tuesday, June 4. Matt, thanks so much for joining me here. How are you doing?
I'm doing really, really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, can't complain. So before we kind of talk about the film itself, I wanted to ask, how did this all start? Where did you get the idea of making a documentary on Roberto Duran?
Yeah. What's this random English guy doing a film on Roberto Duran in Panama, right? Well, I met Roberto. I was doing the documentary on a British fighter, Ricky Hatton, a few years ago, and Roberto came into the room, lit up the room. Obviously everybody knows who Roberto Duran is, but there was something next level about his charisma, his presence. Got me kind of thinking, this is an impressive character. Fast forward a couple of years, and I met my now wife, who grew up in Panama. She's half American, half Panamanian, and she was talking about Duran and Panama's history. And I started to just sort of put the two storylines together in my head, and I found the politics really interesting and important to the story. And I wanted to do something that was a bit more weighty than just a sports story, had some other layers to it. Went to Panama, did some research, and everybody kept telling me the same thing. We went through some terrible, terrible, tumultuous times in the 80s, and every time we were down on our knees, Duran brought us up. He was our beacon of hope. And that's kind of where it all stemmed from.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because that's kind of the way I looked at it. Is like the way the film was constructed and framed, it really did look like Duran, in some ways, both figuratively and to some extent literally, was kind of like the physical manifestation of sort of the highs and lows that Panama was experiencing throughout his boxing career. So was that really, was that the intent of the documentary, to sort of showcase how Duran sort of, lifted up the spirits of the Panamanian people, with his victories, with his, defeats in the ring, the no mas fight being, such an integral part of everything? Or was that sort of something that, as you were investigating, you were sort of figuring out that's something that you thought you wanted to explore more in the film, rather than just say, this is a documentary about Roberto Duran, the boxer?
Yeah, I think that was the hope, if I'm honest. I saw these two narratives potentially knitting together, but it's only until you really get deep into the story and the history, and you have to respect the truth. You can't just construct something because it sounds like a good idea. When we delved into it, it really was the case, and I was getting first-person accounts of how that was the case. And I think what Roberto did for his people, which is what I love about sport, is he gave them an identity. He was the one thing they could be proud of. They're a small country, and they had this fighter that was dominating on a global stage, and that's powerful, when you've got very little going on at that time in your own country. So that was definitely the intention, but I was amazed at some of the testimonies we got that further corroborated that, and how the timelines seemed to completely mirror each other. It wasn't skewed, and it was actually pinpointed to certain moments in his career. The country went down when his career went down, and vice versa. So, yeah, it's just one of those neat little synergies, I guess.
That's another thing that I personally really liked about the film, was kind of like the personal stories and anecdotes of a lot of the fighters and a lot of the people interviewed, talking about their personal experiences with Roberto. One that really stuck out to me, I'm not, not to spoil the specifics, but was when a young Mike Tyson went to one of Duran's fights. And I thought, what he said really stuck out to me, because I thought that was really interesting. As you were doing this film and you were with Roberto, what's sort of one personal story or anecdote from your experience that you had with Roberto Duran throughout this project?
Well, me and Roberto specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I tend to try and not do too much chit chat outside of interview with protagonists. I need them to feel comfortable with me, but I try not to ask anything too probing because I like to keep it for the camera. But with Roberto, he's sort of he's always got his guard up on certain things, and he's very relaxed and loose about other things. So I think there was one conversation we had over lunch where he let his guard down a little bit, and he was talking about Panama itself, and I think he was sort of suggesting that Panama was in such a great state now, and he's sort of peace with everything now. And he got quite emotional because you could see a man satisfied, and that really struck me because I wasn't. He always seemed so sort of angry or agitated to me, but he's not at all. He's very at peace with everything right now, and I loved the way he just talked about his. It was almost like the normality was such satisfaction for him, if that makes sense. And when I suppose someone has grown up in the most brutal situation that he did, conditions he did, being abandoned, living on the streets, and then going through all this trauma, normality must be all you crave, right? And that's what came across in that little conversation. It was very touching, actually, and made me realise just how lucky we are when I live in England and it's very normal here and everything's easy, and you forget these things sometimes.
The idea, of Roberto sort of being this person that is at peace with himself now that he's done fighting, I thought that really showed, especially in the second half. And one thing that I certainly praise about Duran in this film is that he seemed very human, very honest, and very relaxed with himself, as you just mentioned. Were you expecting maybe Duran to be maybe a little more not defensive or abrasive, but be a little, I guess, more serious regarding certain topics, especially the rivalry that he had with Sugar Ray Leonard, or certain aspects, including the the No Mas fight, the political turmoil, or just the experiences that he had with the Panamanian people when he lost that second fight with Leonard?
Well, I think that you go through that journey with him, actually, in the film. So what you see is what you get. There's an honesty throughout, and I think this is one of the keys to why people like him and relate to him, because he's beyond judgment. He's not trying to sugarcoat anything and portray himself in a kind of slick or false manner, which we get too much of these days. So he's interesting. I see two sides to Roberto often. When you talk boxing and you talk about his loss, he reverts to boxer mode. He can't give an inch. He's very rarely humble about any of his fights, and that's how he was brought up. It's fight, and he cares. He's a boxer. But when you talk to him on more human elements, he's very soft, very emotional, very warm, and very humble as well. So there are kind of two sides to him. And I think that during the interview, there are two moments when he got quite visibly upset. And one of them is related to boxing, and one of them is sort of less related to boxing. The first one is the No Mas fight, and he got prickly during that part of the interview, and we sort of knew he would. He still can't accept it, and that's fair enough. I mean, he's traumatized by it, possibly. And you can see how it affects him on screen in the film, because we let it run. And then the other time he got quite upset was when he was talking about the aftermath of that film and returning to his country and the treatment he got. And because of the love he has for his country and his people, and that he felt from them, when they turned their back on him, the pain was so much more amplified for him. And you could see it flooding back in his memory as he's recalling that moment. And he gets quite, his face starts twitching, gets emotional. His voice actually quivered. It was the first time I heard his voice quiver. So he sort of lives everything, I think, Roberto. And that's why we love him, isn't it? He's just honest.
Another thing I wanted to talk about is especially that the the political turmoil that was going on in Panama at the time. It was documented, very well, and explained a lot of the situations that was going on with the U.S. and Panama regarding the Panama Canal. And then you had the rise of General Noriega, and I thought the fact that you interviewed him was really, really interesting, and did kind of caught me a little bit off guard, but in a good way, that you got to hear some testimony from his side and his personal relationship with Roberto Duran. Was that one interview that you honestly didn't think you would get, or was that something you wanted to try and get, no matter what, for the purposes of fully getting, I guess, kind of both sides of the Duran story as it relates to Panama?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head there, because we're telling a story that's complicated here. And it's not easy to tell in 84 minutes, obviously, all of the complexities of the politics. But a big character that emerges is Noriega. Now, put the sport aside for 1 second. We veer into political documentary at one point, and you got to hear the voices. You got to have balance. Even if it doesn't matter, you just got to have them represented. And I said to the team, let's get Noriega, and we probably all fell about laughing at the idea of that as a hope for the film. But we started to sort of mull on it and find ways, and I think that I'm lucky enough to have a support team around me, some excellent producers that work with me as a director and producer, and we're determined, and we found a way, and we got some great connections that helped us. We couldn't have done it without them. And we got Noriega. So it did feel very surreal to get him, but it felt extremely important for the sake of the film and the overall picture we were trying to build and the broadness, and it makes the film feel bigger. And it was his last ever interview. We did Noriega's last ever interview, and I think it was only his second or third in about 25 years. So it was quite a coup for us to get him, I feel.
Obviously, Roberto Duran, as a lot of people that see this documentary, a lot of people that know of Duran, know that his life and his career is full of so many moments that you can honestly make a 90-minute film of those individual moments alone. What was the challenge in sort of trying to tell this narrative while trying to sort of maybe not do too much on one aspect of his career or of the political situation in Panama, while also still trying to, encompass the full story? What was the challenge in trying to edit and piece together into the film that it ultimately will end up being?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because you look at a story like Roberto. It's vast. Right? He's got a vast career, a vast story. You throw in the politics, and you're going to run out of ink on your whiteboard when you're writing it all down. But the biggest challenge was, a lot of Roberto's character and fabric of character come from where he came from. So they're a result of being a child of the streets, being abandoned by his father. He hung around with this kind of interesting sort of Pied Piper character called Shaflan. How do you represent that? I mean, we don't have any archive footage of it, obviously, and we're certainly not going to start re-dramatizing. So I think that was the biggest challenge. How to convey that there was something that gave him this anger to fight, that was instilled in him from this environment he was born into, but sort of not get too bogged down in it at the same time. I'd like to think that we find the right balance, and we get through that period of his life with some context and sense. But I'm not going to lie, it was difficult to work out the way to maneuver our way around that and through that.
Lastly, as the film comes out in a few days, overall message that you want the viewer to sort of get when they finish watching this movie?
For me, sport and heroes are important. That's what we're getting at with this film, right? He might be a reluctant hero, he might be an active hero, it doesn't matter. People need heroes, and sport is very important in culture and society to permeate beyond the obvious. And I would like to think that whether people see the connection or not with Roberto and his country during those years, well, I'd like to think that they can see it. But for me, it's very important, it's very obvious, and it's happened throughout history where people can raise something beyond just the obvious. And I feel that's what Roberto did for his people. I think that's what he did for his country. And he might have been a reluctant hero at times, and it's even more interesting the fact that he's a flawed hero in many ways. But we need these characters in life. We need these heroes. Kids need them and adults need them. And that's what I hope comes through from this story. It's that hope and that inspiration.
I Am Duran releases on iTunes, Amazon Video, Google Play, and other digital platforms starting Tuesday, June 4th. Matt, again, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me. Congratulations on the project.
Thanks so much for your time, Carlo. Take care.